Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Glad to have you joining the conversation. This is the show where we do our very best every single episode to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stolniker. I am your host. And today we are talking about food. But not just food. We're talking about the process of producing food, growing food, what we should eat, why we should eat it, and how our choices impact our view of the world. How have the globalist ideals impacted farming and what we eat? We're going to talk about this and more with today's guest, Raw Egg Nationalist. Honored to have on as my guest today, the Raw Egg Nationalist. And if you know him, if you're familiar with him, you are familiar with him through social media. Perhaps you have read one of his many books, but really happy to have you on. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to this conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Let's start, if we can, with your story, kind of your background. You have a curious background that would lead you to this place. So maybe you can give us some of that. I would love to start there and move into a couple of very specific areas.
Of course. Well, I mean, there are things I can and things I can't say about myself because it's important for me to maintain my anonymity, like many of my fellow Twitter anons. But it was pure chance, really, that I came to Twitter and started tweeting. I didn't really have a plan. I started following Bronze Age Pervert, who some of the listeners may know or may not know, and I started to hear about people knocking back raw eggs. So I didn't actually start Raw Egg Nationalism, but it was a hashtag that was kind of going around. So I got behind that, and things just really started to take off once I started tweeting. I released a cookbook, the Raw Egg Nationalist Cookbook, which initially I published myself through Amazon KDP, and also put it up for free download, and like 30 or 40,000 people downloaded it. The sales really started to take off of the paperback on Amazon, and my account really has just grown from there. People have really got behind the raw egg slonking, and not only as an aesthetic practice, but also a political one too, resisting the globalists and their plans for us all to eat bugs and soy slop.
Right. What when you maintain your anonymity, and I understand that, and particularly in a world where cancel culture is the culture that we're living in. What was your decision to do that? Was that just, I want to be able to speak freely and not have blowback or repercussions, or was it deeper than that?
Yeah, it really was a case that I just didn't think that I'd be able to say the things I want to say without repercussion, which is a sad indictment of the current situation, because really I'm just trying to tell people to get healthy, to take responsibility for their lives, and be the best people they can be. That's the basic message.
So let's start with this then. Why raw eggs? I think that's the probably the big question we need to start with from there, because you pivot that into a view of globalism and even the Great Reset and so many other things. But why raw eggs? Let's start with that.
Well, raw eggs are are one of the great superfoods. They're one of nature's great superfoods, and it's a sad indictment of the current state of nutrition and scientific advice about nutrition, that people are discouraged from eating eggs because they're told, well, it's basically the cholesterol in eggs that is supposedly what's so bad about them. You eat cholesterol, you get heart disease, you die. Right. That's been the message for the past.
That's the basic message.
Yeah, that is the basic message that really developed after the Second World War. So we're talking about the last sort of 50 to 70 years that message sort of arose and then became dominant. But the thing is that actually raw eggs eating large quantities of raw eggs used to be something that all of the Golden Age bodybuilders did. And my avatar on Twitter is Vince Gironda, who was a maverick 50s and 60s bodybuilder who advocated the consumption of large quantities, up to 36 a day, of raw eggs as an alternative to doing a steroid cycle, because he was a natural bodybuilder. He didn't advocate the use of steroids, which were just starting to become popular in bodybuilding in the 50s and 60s. His argument was that it's not necessarily the protein in the eggs that is doing all of the work. It's actually the cholesterol. It's the maligned cholesterol, this terrible substance that we must all avoid, that is actually mimicking the anabolic effects of a steroid. And the interesting thing is that now we have all sorts of scientific research that actually shows that that is true. There are scientific studies that I've cited in my books and talked about on Twitter that show that actually there's a closer correlation between consumption of cholesterol and muscle gain than there is between consumption of protein and muscle gain. There's a linear response, or a linear dose response is what they call it, between cholesterol and muscle gain. The more you consume, the more muscle you put on, basically.
Right.
So raw eggs have kind of become this sort of rallying point almost for people who want to reject the terrible, terrible nutritional advice that we've been fed for the last 50 to 70 years that really has sickened and weakened millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people in the developed world. Really all for corporate profit, corporate gain.
Right.
So we're trying to get away from that sort of poisoned nutritional advice and get back to real whole foods that aren't in the control of corporate interests, that can't be patented, to restore the health of individuals so we can restore the health of the nation. That's the political connection.
Are you encouraged by the movement? There seems to be a big movement toward whole foods. It's funny because back in the 60s we were told that sugar was good, fat was bad. We've since understood that was entirely wrong. That was manipulation, as you mentioned, is corporate manipulation of people, and created a very unhealthy generation. There seems to be this move or this swing to whole foods. Is that a positive thing? I ask it for this reason. It sounds like it would be. However, a lot of the move toward whole foods is not toward eggs and meats and naturally occurring proteins. It's towards the vegetables and pushing away things like eggs, like meat, like other sustainable sources of protein. How do you look at that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do. Eating a whole food diet of any sort, I think, is better than eating corporate sort of slop diet of processed foods. But yes, I mean, ultimately, the foods that allow us to fulfill our physical potential as human beings must be nutrient-dense animal foods. Absolutely must be. And I draw a lot on the work of a very, very famous dentist called Weston Price, who you may have heard of. He wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration in the mid-1930s. He was a dentist in Cleveland, and around about the time when basically people in the US were making a transition from whole food diets to diets that were primarily composed of industrially produced, especially grain products. And he noticed basically that especially the children were suffering all sorts of terrible, terrible developmental deformities in their jaws. Narrow, crowded teeth, terrible cavities. The dental arches, which is the top of the mouth, was improperly formed. They had very narrow cheeks, narrow nasal passages. And this, as well as marring the way that they looked, then you have to understand that dentition actually is an index of general health. So if you have poor dentition, if you have cavities, crowded teeth, narrow dental arches, etc., you're going to be unhealthy, full stop.
Yeah.
So he was very struck by this, what he was seeing, because it was child after child coming into his surgery. he eventually he sort of figured out, well, it's got to be something that they're eating, or it's got to be what they're eating. So he decided to go on this sort of mad trip around the world looking for traditional societies who were eating their traditional diets or whole food diets, and to see if he could find any traditional groups who had what he considered to be perfect health, and then to find out what they were eating. And so he travelled the length and breadth of the world, North America, Australia, Africa, even to Europe, even to rural parts or remote parts of Europe, the Highlands of Scotland, Alpine Switzerland, and he found about 14 different peoples that he thought displayed perfect health. And although their diets varied, because of course, they're living in different parts of the world, there are different things to eat, nevertheless, all of their diets were principally based on nutrient-dense animal foods. So organs, fatty cuts of meat, eggs, butter, stuff like that, with some plant foods, but nevertheless, it was very, very clear to him that actually the more plant foods you ate, the less healthy you were likely to be, especially if they were processed plant foods. So I mean, I'm unequivocally of the opinion that it has to be nutrient-dense animal whole foods that we prioritize. I'm not saying you shouldn't eat vegetables or fruit.
Of course.
I'm not an advocate of carnivore, for instance, although it does seem to help some people in some situations, especially if they have autoimmune problems. But I do think that you have to prioritize these nutrient-dense animal foods that our ancestors prioritized, and they prioritized them for a reason.
As you know, our friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. He didn't stop by simply creating the best pillow. Now Mike has done it again by introducing his My Slippers. For a limited time, you will save $90 on a pair of My Slippers. This blowout sale of the year won't last, so order now. Mike has taken 2 years to develop the My Slippers, and they are designed to wear both indoor and out all day long. Made with MyPillow foam and impact gel to help prevent fatigue, they are also made with quality leather suede. Call 1-800-870-0283, use the promo code SITREP, or go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, and use promo code SITREP. This offer will not last long, so order now with promo code SITREP at mypillow.com. It's such an interesting topic, the topic of nutrition. I am fully a believer that every person needs to figure out what works best with their biology, with the activities that they're involved in, with the things that they do. And they need to figure that out, and whatever works for them, they need to do. I'm fully in support of that. But when we start talking about people who have philosophical opinions about food, it's really interesting how people divide into kind of left and right camps. And it's something that I've never really understood. It's clear, you can see it. I mean, we make fun of people who go to Whole Foods, for instance. I mean, because we just assume, right? If you shop at Whole Foods, you're probably also voted for Joe Biden here in the United States or whatever, which is a broad generalization. Why is it, though, that generally speaking, people do divide into kind of these left and right camps as it relates to food? Now, and again, I'm talking philosophically, not because this works best for me, but people who are against meat, or on the other side, people who are against vegetarians and vegans. Why does it divide along those political lines?
I mean, that's a very, very interesting question, and I think it gets to the heart actually of a lot of much broader changes that have taken place over the course of the 20th century in political movements. I mean, it's interesting now that the left, for instance, almost invariably comes down on the side of corporate interests. Now, that's something that's very markedly happened, I think, since Occupy Wall Street. I think Occupy Wall Street and the subversion of Occupy Wall Street, which is a topic in itself. But in 2010, people were marching against Merrill Lynch and against the big banks, Goldman Sachs. They were the 1%. They were the people who should be, expropriated, whatever you want to call it. And then 10 years later, all the leftists are marching in gay pride parades with the backing of Merrill Lynch and Goldman Sachs.
Sure.
There's something very interesting has happened to make leftism almost like you could say almost a play piece or a pawn of corporate interests. I mean, a lot of people on the right today actually are saying things that hippies used to say. I mean, I say things that sound pretty hippy-dippy sometimes, and there are other people in the sphere who say even hippier-dippier things than I do. It's very, very interesting how the cookie has crumbled and how we've ended up with it being right-wing, for instance, to want to eat meat. It being right-wing, for instance. And, I mean, you see tweets about this all the time. There's a new book by George Monbiot, which is out, called Regenesis, and it's basically arguing the opposite of what my new book is arguing. He's basically arguing for the Great Reset vision of sort of global plant-based diet, and where we give up all forms of animal agriculture. But somebody there was a comment that somebody made on a post about the book saying that basically making the equation between eating meat and being a fascist, and that is what people are doing now. I don't think so. As you know, I was saying about the sort of hippy-dippy aspect, I don't think necessarily that there's any reason why it should be a right issue, for instance, to eat meat. But that just seems seems to be where we've ended up now for various historical reasons. I don't think it's, you know, I mean, if you say compared Soviet propaganda about fitness from from any time in the Soviet Union, you would see that actually the Soviet Union championed the kind of physical ideals actually that a lot of us champion us we right-wing bodybuilders. But something has happened to leftism, I think, to make it a kind of slave to this new agenda to rid the world of meat eating.
When you talk about the Great Reset, I've heard you describe that one of the goals of the Great Reset is, and you do it much better than I can restate what you've said, but is to make us weak, to make us dependent, to keep us kind of in our cages or in our bubbles. How does that play into this view of food and nutrition?
Well, it's the thing is, of course, the globalists who are advocating a global plant-based diet, for instance, they don't say that it's to make you weak. Of course, they're never going to say that. They say that they use all of these rigged studies that say that a plant-based diet is more healthy than an animal-based diet and all that kind of stuff. They have all this bad science on their side, and they also happen to have the sort of I would say the moral high ground in public discourse as well. So they are believed they're believed to be benevolent and to have our best interests at heart. But you only need to examine the evidence for what they actually want to do in a more dispassionate light to see the effect, for instance, of consuming a plant-based diet without any animal products, to see that actually the effect is likely to be one of mass malnutrition. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the new book is the original Neolithic revolution, which took place in the Near East 10 to 12,000 years ago. That was the creation of farming as we know it, the creation of fixed field farming with grains. And I look at that process in detail and the actual physical effects, the social effects of that, because I think that in many ways there are all sorts of parallels with what would happen if the world were to go, if all 10 billion people, because that's the population prediction for 2050. If all 10 billion people in 2050 were eating a plant-based diet, I think that there would be widespread malnutrition. I think that people would probably be shorter, because that's a widely observed effect of suboptimal diet, and has been it's observable in the skeletal record if you look at if you dig bodies up, and it's also observable, actually has been observable in real time in recent centuries, like in the Victorian period when people transitioned to industrially produced, largely grain-based diets. So I mean, I think, yes, there's an official story, which is that all of this stuff is going to make us healthier and it will be better for the planet and everyone will be happier, blah, blah, blah. But then actually when you examine the claims, that's when you come to realize, and that's what I do. That's what I do in the book, is I put all of these claims that they make to the test about the health benefits of the kind of diets that they want us to be eating.
One of the pushbacks, of course, too, is sustainability. And
yes.
It's very interesting, that argument. In fact, I was listening to the radio here in Southern California yesterday, and the host was talking about a new study that seems to indicate that raising cows, even, and beef, is more sustainable in the long run than a lot of the plant-based things that we're doing. And these studies go back and forth, as you know, but how do you talk about sustainability when you describe things like this?
Yeah, well, sustainability is an interesting word, because I think what it implies, I think, especially in the current set of circumstances, is it doesn't go far enough, I think, because what we've done is we've depleted the world's soils to such an extent that what we actually need to do is we need to restore them. So it's not about whether now at this late stage, when the soils are in their last 10% or 15%, whether we can then manage them at that same level of 15%. What we want is we want to build them back up again. We want to we want to nourish the earth again. We want to restore the topsoil. We want to increase biodiversity. So I mean, I get behind a movement that's known as regenerative agriculture, which is championed by people like Joel Salatin, who's been on Joe Rogan a few times, I think, and other people like that who, I mean, what they're basically doing is they're doing farming in the old school way, so no artificial chemicals, nothing like that, using manure and relying primarily on livestock, especially cows, grazers, to replenish the soils, and they do that. And Joel Salatin, he has a small farm in the US on the East Coast, I think, and it's a miracle what he manages to do with a very, very small amount of land that's just managed incredibly carefully and with love. And it flies in the face of everything that we are told about the unsustainability, the bad ethics of rearing livestock. I mean, his animals couldn't be happier. The food couldn't be more delicious and more nourishing that he produces. And so people like that, really, I mean, they're the people we want to follow, not the people who say, like the globalists, that what we need is an intensification of industrial grain agriculture to feed the entire world, a plant-based diet, because that is exactly what it entails. Is to feed 10 billion people a grain-based diet, we are going to have to intensify industrial agriculture many, many times over, and that will involve using genetically modified forms of crops. I mean, I talk about this at length in the book, about GMO and the problems of GMO and the dangers of GMO and things like that. And also the fact, actually, that people don't seem to realize that, actually, I mean, people say this all the time, we can just convert the land that we used for grazing into cropland. Right. Well, they don't. I mean, these people have obviously never heard of the concept of marginal land, which basically means there is agricultural land that can only be used for grazing. It's poor quality land that can only be used for grazing. 60% of all agricultural land in the world is marginal land.
Wow.
Something like only 3% of all agricultural land is prime crop growing land. 3%.
Unbelievable.
So it's like, why would you give up 60% of the world's agricultural land, which can produce the most nutritious, food imaginable. You know, these animal food, beef liver, lamb, all these other things, all these other grazing animals. Why would you give that up? It's madness when you look at it like that. But people aren't in possession of all of the facts, very basic facts about the nature of farming and about the nature of agricultural land. It's but they're being sold this ridiculous plant-based model on the basis of a very, very limited or minimal possession of the facts, which is something that I'm trying to, in a small way, rectify as much as I can.
Yep. Is that all it is? Because I understand why globalists would push for this, even corporations to some extent. Does it just come down to that? The information is available, but these folks either for some reason don't have access to it or are so constrained in their bubble of knowledge and their friend group and what they allow to influence them that they just aren't looking at the facts. I mean, we've been through 2 years of science says, right?
Yeah.
So we all know that people will buy into things that don't make any sense. Is it just that? Is it just they don't have the information and so they're making bad decisions?
I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot of things. I think it's cognitive biases as well.
Yep.
And I mean, it's yes. I mean, it's a mixture of both. It's cognitive biases and a lack of information. I mean, people think, for instance, that all forms of animal agriculture all forms of livestock rearing essentially have to look like concentration camps. That's what they think. You know, like you have the only way that you can raise livestock at scale is to create a concentration camp for cows or pigs or chickens.
Right.
And you don't. That's the thing. But people don't know that. So while on the one hand, the vegan and vegetarian critique of industrial livestock raising methods is perfectly valid, and I am 100% behind it. You know, industrial agriculture is a monstrosity.
Cruelty to animals is not what you're
no
what you're pushing for, right?
No, not only. I mean, it's ethically wrong.
Yeah,
but also it produces inferior. It produces inferior product as well.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's not as good for you. It doesn't taste as good, and it's evil. So, but the thing is that
not a lot of pluses there.
no. But the thing is that people don't realize that isn't the only way to raise animals at scale. And so there's a good book that I rely on in my book, The Eggs Benedict Option, called Sacred Cow by I think it's Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers, and they talk about regenerative agriculture and livestock raising, and they make the case for raising all cows in the US on pasture. So you stop with these what are they called? CAFOs, concentrated agricultural feed operations, I think they're called, where you just keep all the animals in one place and shove them full of grain, basically.
Right.
So they make this very compelling argument that you could get rid of that and all cows in the US could be pastured. That's a lot of cows. That's millions of cows. But the US is a big place,
sure.
And you've got plenty of land to do it. So yeah, I mean, I do think it's ignorance, cognitive biases, and also mystification. Yes, it's mystification by the people who stand the most to gain from mystifying ordinary people about the nature of agriculture.
It's fascinating. Such a big topic. It's fascinating to talk to people because we're so invested in our bias, as you mentioned, as it regards food and even the raising of food. When you talk about nationalism, I know this is a bit of a jump, but when you talk about nationalism, how do you define that? You go by the moniker of Raw Egg Nationalist. What's a nationalist in your view?
A nationalist is somebody who, I mean, let's say a politician is a politician who puts the needs and interests of his own people, his own nation first, really.
Yeah.
As exemplified, for all his faults, by somebody like Donald Trump, who, I mean, brought about a total U-turn in American policy for 4 years, and had to be destroyed because he did that, and was at least partially destroyed for doing that. that, I mean, it's really it's a common sense idea of what nationalism is. It's to protect the interests of your own immediate local communities all the way up to the level of the nation first. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you a total kind of head in the sand isolationism. I think it just means it's a reorientation and I think if more nations were nationalists in their orientation, then actually international relations would probably be better, because these globalists have all sorts of really quite pernicious aims that are, you only need to look at what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, if that wouldn't have happened under Donald Trump, I don't think. He was reigning in NATO. So that's the kind of idea of nationalism that I have, is just that it's a reorientation away from benefiting the interests of a global elite and a global class of mega rich people who couldn't give a damn about ordinary people.
That phrase or that term, nationalism, or to be a nationalist, has such a negative connotation in the United States, and I've used it in the past to describe myself, and I just stopped because you have to spend 45 minutes explaining what you mean by that. But you're exactly right. There's nothing negative about that. It's about saying, this is where I live, this is the community that I participate in, and I want what's best for this community. And it's crazy how that term has been hijacked and maligned, again, I think by the globalists, because they want us to stay away from it. I know we don't have a lot of time left. Let's talk about your books, or if you wouldn't mind, why you started writing and what people can expect when they come to your books. And I know you have a new one just recently published.
Yep. Well, I'm from a literary background, so it wasn't a big departure for me. I've written under my own name, although it does seem like a lifetime ago now. But what can people expect from my books? Well, I started with a cookbook, which is also a political manifesto. So don't just expect recipes. Expect expect some sort of politics and philosophy. And when in the cookbook, I outline what raw egg nationalism is, and I talk about the sort of history of food and social control and that kind of thing. That was my first book. Then I wrote a book about called 3 Lives of Golden Age Bodybuilders, which is about 3 classic bodybuilders from the 1960s, and the sort of it's like a series of biographies, but also lessons that we can learn from the way that they did bodybuilding as opposed to the way that people do bodybuilding now, which is kind of like a gross parody of the original ideals of bodybuilding, which were to have a beautiful aesthetic body that would sort of be part of a beautiful life, rather than just being as incredibly massive as you can be.
Right.
Chugging protein shakes all day.
Right.
I wrote a book about Vince Gironda, which was a bit of a kind of a jokey book, called Draw Me a Gironda, which was also a guide about how to draw pictures of Vince Gironda. And then since then, I started a magazine called Man's World, which is like a sort of attempt to revive the glory days of Playboy, when Playboy was actually worth reading. That's another thing. And then we've got the new book, which is the EGGS BENEDICT Option, which has just been released. It's about a week old now. It's on Amazon now, Barnes & Noble, Book Depository, and also can be bought directly from the publisher. But that's my longest book. It's my biggest book. It's all about the Great Reset, what they want to do to food, the effects that it's likely to have if the globalists end up winning and making us eat the kind of food that they want us to eat. But then, of course, so it's not just a descriptive book. It's also like it also has a solution to the problem, my solution to the problem, which is the EGGS BENEDICT Option. So that's a play on the Benedict Option by Rod Dreher, which is a book about how Christians can survive in an America that is increasingly hostile to Christian life. And this book, similarly, is about how we can resist the globalists and bring in a new sort of golden age of health and fitness. So I look at things like small-scale farming in Russia, Russian household farming it's called, where ordinary Russian people produce a very, very significant proportion of the food that they eat. So something like 50%, 50+% of all food consumed by value in Russia is produced by people in their own gardens.
Wow.
Which is amazing. And I go into great detail about this. It's a big topic, and it's something that people haven't really been turned on to. I mean, people in the sort of small scale farming and the farming world kind of know about it, but it's not something that's been discussed much in a kind of popular way.
Are you generally, last question.
Yeah, no, great.
I keep asking
I don't mind. Ask away.
Are you generally optimistic about kind of the future, not just of farming and food, but as you connect that to the Great Reset and what it means to kind of function in the interests of your community and country? Are you generally optimistic, or is it kind of a wait and see?
I think in some sense you have to be. I mean, I think that to be fully human really is to hope. So I think that we do have to maintain our optimism, and there are reasons for us to maintain our optimism. Although Donald Trump's presidency was a failure in many ways, and he was, and he has all sorts of faults as a person and as a leader. He really, really scared the globalists. I mean, he terrified them. That's why they tried to prevent him once he was elected from taking up office. The lies started before he got into office, and the lies and sabotage continued throughout his 4 years and are continuing now, because he may run again as I'm sure he will run again as for the presidency. They are scared. They are really scared of a leader like Donald Trump, who will reorient America, who will, and I do think that actually it would probably be a death blow to the globalists, or something like a death blow, for Donald Trump to be re-elected again, and for America First to really take hold in America.
Right.
I think that America actually is the key to all of this. I think America's future will decide the future of the rest of the world, to be honest with you. Wow. And so, yes, I am optimistic, but there is also the chance that they'll win. But all that's just to say that nothing's certain, which is also in its own way a cause for optimism.
No, that's good. I appreciate what you're doing in light of that, because I think you're right. Information is the key, and people being willing to set their own bias aside to consider the actual available information. And we have so much information available to us that if people will really investigate and really figure out what's going on, they'll make good decisions. I'm optimistic because I think the last 2 years have been so difficult that people have really started to look around and go, maybe I need to figure this out for myself. And I think that's a very good place to be. Where can people find your books and follow you and really follow your writing and your thought?
Well, my my Twitter handle is babygravy9. Don't ask. It's very silly. So that's my Twitter handle. I have a page of links which can be accessed from my Twitter account, or you can just go to lnk.bio/Raw Egg Nationalist, and that has links to all of my books, to my Amazon author page, the magazine, all that kind of stuff. So if you go to my Twitter account, you'll find the way to get to everything else, basically. But
awesome.
my books are all on Amazon, so you can go there too and just search Raw Egg Nationalist. I've got an Instagram account as well, which is not particularly serious, but go to the Twitter account if you want to find out what I'm about.
Fantastic. Appreciate it. Man, so much great stuff here. Maybe we can talk again. I need to pick up some of your books and learn about raw eggs and nationalism, how those two intersect. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day. The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. We've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live. Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org. What a great conversation, fascinating conversation. This is something that I don't think most of us spend a lot of time thinking about. We have opinions, as we discussed during the interview, but we really need to think about these issues, these topics, beyond just how we feel about them. Whether or not you eat animal protein, whether or not you fall into a vegetarian or vegan camp, all of these decisions, these choices have implications well beyond our own lives, and we need to understand that. Appreciate the work of Raw Egg Nationalist in bringing this to us. We need the information so that we can make the right decisions, and that's what this show is all about. And certainly his work. Please go and follow him. Thank you for listening. If you are not yet subscribed to this podcast, you need to subscribe. Do it right now. Go ahead and subscribe. And then take some time, go over to our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube. Look for The Situation Report. You'll find our channel there. This episode, so many incredible episodes. Not every episode, because it turns out YouTube doesn't like all of our episodes, but most of them are there. And the great thing about YouTube is it's very easy to watch, of course, but you can share that content out, leave us a comment, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you next time.